Welcome to another episode of No Free Lunch, Economics for a Fallen World. I'm your host, Professor Jeff Guernsey, joined as always by Dr. Jeff Heyman. We're going to speak today about the topic of minimum wage, no doubt something that you've heard before and read about in the text as well. So Dr. Heyman, briefly describe a minimum wage and how does it work?
Sure. The minimum wage is an interesting kind of thing. Economically, we would think that this was a really, really big deal because of the politics behind it. We're always hearing about it, when in reality, very few people actually earn the minimum wage, and it's not a real driver of our overall economy. But economists really focus on this because it really violates one of our fundamental precepts, the law of demand. It suggests to the extent a minimum wage doesn't cause any problems, we actually don't have downward sloping demand curves. And if you've watched the previous videos, I think you would agree. Yes, they do slope downwards. And so that's why we pay attention to it economically, what it means. But obviously the kind of the political connotations with respect to, should we have a living wage and so forth. It's really something we're always, it seems like we never get away from it. But we're going to go through the economics of it right now and just use the diagram to kind of illustrate this purpose. So let's talk through the diagram. Let's assume for a moment that the underlying market wage through the competitive market process would leave unskilled labor at something like $5.15 an hour. And so what that would mean would be every worker that would want a job that was willing to work would be able to get $5.15 an hour, and every company that wanted to hire low-skilled labor could hire all the workers they would want at that price. But we might see through the political process that, hey, you can't possibly live on $5.15 an hour. We need a raise, an increase in the minimum wage. So let's make it like $6.45 an hour. When we do that, we've caused a problem here because the underlying market realities where every worker that would like a job and every company that would like to hire a job, the quantities would equal at that equilibrium quantity at $5.15. If you arbitrarily set the price through what we call price control, the government fixes a price. In this case, it's a price floor because the firms are not allowed to pay below that price. What you do is you look on the supply curve, and that increase in salary from $5.15 an hour to $6.45 induces a number of people who didn't want to work at $5.15 an hour, but now that it's a higher wage, yes, they would like a job. So we get an increased quantity from the original Q star up to this QS1. And then likewise, the firms, when they see the higher price, there are many marginal firms that it was just worth it to them to hire somebody when the price was $5.15 an hour. And now they can't afford $6.45. Their business model doesn't support that. And so their demand is going to drop as we move down the demand curve to QD1. And so what we see here is that the amount supplied, QS1, is much greater than QD1. So what we have is a surplus of labor. And so, yes, for certain individuals that get the minimum wage and keep it, their monetary compensation, we'll need to get to that in a moment, might be better, yet that the overall amount of workers will not necessarily be improved at all because some of these workers are only coming out now because of this surplus, because of the higher wage. But some of these people that would have liked to have worked at the equilibrium quantity before, but now because of the reduction in demand, all these workers, that whatever that number turns out to be, they're in a much worse situation because formerly they were able to get $5.15 an hour, and now they get zero because they're not allowed to work at all. We effectively make it illegal for these low-skilled workers whose productivity does not yield a return to the company of $6.45 or greater. We've denied them the opportunity to work. So that's basically how the minimum wage works.
So if the minimum wage is above the market clearing price, there's this surplus, and it appears, surplus of labor, and it appears that there is a reduction in labor that's actually hired.
That's right.
But those people are going to get paid more. Those people are going to continue to work. So that's what we see. We see that there's going to be X number of people employed at $6.45. So what's the big deal? A few people lose a job, but others are better off.
That's an argument that's, and as Christians, we typically would not find that very compelling because it's at root, it's a utilitarian argument. that hey, the goods of the whole, we're just going to aggregate it here, and if more people are benefited than are harmed, then we're okay with it. But as a Christian, we think we have a fundamental right to work. We think it's a gift from God, from the garden, and for us to arbitrarily by policy say we're going to make it illegal for you to have a legal wage because your skills are low, that seems to me to be troubling. But what we have here is a situation where even those people that get higher monetary compensation, it's not at all clear that they're better off in that sense. Because remember, while we show the diagram here, this is it's a simple diagram, and it leaves out some things. This only includes the monetary compensation. There are many non-monetary forms of compensation, and if an employer is forced to pay more in monetary compensation, they're going to have to pay less in other forms of compensation. For instance, they might not have as many benefits for health care, education sometimes, even these smaller companies might have, training kinds of things that would be available, work shift flexibility, all those kinds of things. Presumably, these workers would have already been working with their employer to negotiate a total compensation package, which includes the monetary compensation as well as these other benefits, to their benefit. And the fact when you arbitrarily change one part, it's not all clear that the workers did not value those other aspects more. So it's not clear even those that, quote, win are going to be better off. But what is clear is the folks that lose their jobs are much, much worse off. So that's kind of a way I would think about this as well.
So economists have studied this, right? There's been a number of empirical studies. Some of them say, hey, there's not much of an impact to a change in the increase in the minimum wage. Others show, oh, yes, there has been an impact. Why the difference?
Sure. Well, the vast preponderance, the last Federal Reserve summary study that I saw was about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was like about 70% of the total studies still show a significant impact to this. But as I was just mentioning, you may not see an impact in job loss, as our simple model would suggest, because they may cut other forms of compensation. For instance, after the Affordable Care Act was passed, there were quite a number of firms which forced workers to take less than that 32 hours of work. They were still employed, quote, quote, by the way we have the definition of our unemployment. Yet they weren't able to get sufficient hours, such that many times they were having to take 2 jobs to make the same compensation as before, which is a rather awkward way of trying to meet your overall compensation goals. And so that's one aspect of this. The other aspect, of course, is here's what to people that really believe there's no impact. It's real simple to show they're false. And this is rhetorical, but it's a really good rhetorical question. Okay, if $6.45 is a good wage, well then why not 25? 25 is clearly a lot more livable than $6.45. And if 25 is okay, why not 50? Wouldn't we want to just pay? If we assume there's no impact from this, those questions are legitimate questions. But they are really impacts to it, and we see this in other ways as well. The other aspect where you see that the politicians that are pushing this go awry, almost always, I have not seen a case where they do not phase this in. Well, when you ask, well, why do you need to phase it in? If it's such a good deal, why not just do it? And the answer is, well, clearly we've got to give businesses time to get ready for this. This is a big change. Well, what does getting ready for this mean, except for adjusting their processes, give them time to adjust on some other margin that may not be to the employee's benefit? In many cases, that leads to increased automation and leads to people that were never hired in the first place. So that might not be seen. So the employment growth may slow from what it was, and that may be harder to discern in the data. Because again, remember, low-skilled labor is a very small component of our workforce, so it's not always seen. For those that have been to McDonald's recently, you see the kiosks. Those are just those are ways that companies work towards this. In my estimation, we've had over the last 70 or so years systematic policies which go against low-skilled labor specifically and make it more valuable for companies to invest in capital and higher skilled laborers, which is one of the reasons we see fewer startup opportunities.
Great. Thanks for your explanation about minimum wage. And thanks for
Thank you.
joining us today for this conversation about minimum wage, an example when a price is not able to meet its market clearing price but is above that price. It's one of many examples of that, probably the best known and most talked about as far as economists go. That's it for this episode of No Free Lunch.